Over there, on the other side of the not yet wonderful circumstances of our lives, is where we so often long to be. The place where we're finally who we want to be, where we achieve the goals we set out to accomplish, where we finally get where we aim to go. Not yet is the good life that always seems to be just out of reach, while the right now, today, feels fraught with lack of progress, impossible challenges, and unwanted circumstances. How do we live presently and courageously in our right now circumstances when all the not yet we long for seems so far away? How do we find our right now seasons purposeful when we cannot yet see how they will be fruitful? Welcome to the Now and Not Yet Bible Study. I'm Ruth Chou Simons, and I'm excited to be on this journey with you as we discover 6 ways God is more faithful than we know. It's in these 6 sessions that we will take an honest look at the tension of living in the not yet resolved, not yet fruitful, not yet clear, or not yet wonderful seasons of our lives. The Bible is a book about God. It details the wonder of God's pursuit of us and how he desires to have a relationship with us. When we encounter him through the pages of his word, we begin to see his ways, his character, his purposes, and his faithfulness in the lives of his people. The more we understand God's ways, the more we will see our right now circumstances through the lens of God's faithfulness. So over the next several weeks, we will discover together how God is purposeful and at work in our daily lives through every season. He doesn't waste a thing. So let's get started. And friend, I'm so glad you're here. I often include the word unlikely when I share that I'm a mother to 6 boys. I know, it sounds a little overwhelming to me too. You see, motherhood, let alone to 6 sons, was a calling I would have said was impossible if you'd asked me 25 years ago when I was first married. As far as I could tell, I lacked the skill set, giftings, and natural inclination that I believed were needed to succeed at motherhood. I'm not patient enough. I don't have what it takes. This can't be the plan, I thought. Have you found yourself saying or thinking similarly about something you've been given to do right now that you feel like you're not yet equipped for? Does it feel like God's chosen the wrong person for the job? This week, we're digging into a biblical account of a man named Abram, whose name will change to Abraham, and we'll see a lot of unlikely in his story too. It's a story about God choosing to make a promise, a covenant with Abram, a promise through which God would accomplish his plan to rescue broken and sinful people like you and me. But before we jump into the story, here's something we need to consider about promises. The strength of any promise is only found in the character of the promise maker, right? Do you remember doing trust fall exercises in youth camp or at team building retreats? So fun, right? The idea of falling blithely into the arms of someone standing behind you, supposedly ready to catch you before you hit the ground, is a real problem for someone with trust issues. Ask me how I know. Imagine that your trust fall partner, the one standing behind you with outstretched arms, was a class clown. Imagine if he didn't take anything seriously and made a joke out of everything. Would you sign up to fall back toward him with your full weight? Imagine if the partner behind you had a reputation for being a couch potato, playing video games around the clock and being sustained by Cheez-Its. He's telling you he'll try his best, but he's not sure he's the right one for the job. His arm's a little gangly and he's looking bored with the assignment. Would you fall or no? I'd say it's a hard pass for me. Because when your safety, security, and maybe your life depends on it, you want someone you can depend on. The qualifications of the one you're trusting matters. Abram's story will show us that God is trustworthy. He's always faithful, even when the promise he makes doesn't appear to match up with the present circumstances. And because he's faithful, you and I, like Abram, can confidently believe what he says is true every single time. Okay, friend, with that in mind, I invite you to turn in your own Bible now to Genesis chapter 12 and read along as I read beginning with verse 1. Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land I will show you, and I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Abram's response? Well, the text goes on in verse 4 and says, so Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Is it just me, or does it seem inconceivable that Abram does what God asks with no record of hesitation or question? The author of Hebrews, reflecting on Abram's story and the reality of his actions, tell us in chapter 11, verse 8, by faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. As inconceivable as it sounds, that's exactly what happens. Abram does what God asks. No questions asked. Did you hear the promises that were made? As Abram and Sarai journey on, God repeats his promises to Abram in Genesis chapter 12, verse 7, and Genesis 13, verses 14 through 17, and again in Genesis chapter 15. Flip forward to Genesis chapter 15. And he, God, brought him outside and said, look toward heaven and number the stars if you are able to number them. Then he, God, said to him, so shall your offspring be. We see Abram's response this time in verse 6, and it's right in line with this previous one. It says, and he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. The Hebrew origin of the word translated as believed here carries the idea of being certain, trusting in, or being established, to be verified or made firm. Sometimes it's even translated to be nourished. All that to say, Abram's belief was not a casual, if you say so, kind of belief. It was an, I'm banking everything on the words you've said to come true kind of belief. Do you know what makes this interaction between God and Abram so stunning? As God makes and repeats these promises, Abram has no children, and the land God has promised is inhabited by the enemy. That being said, though Abram clearly has faith in God, his question in verse 8 of chapter 15 feels like an appropriate one. Will you look there with me? But he said, "Oh, Lord God, how am I to know that I shall possess it?" I think I'd be asking the same question. I have asked the same question in lots of unlikely circumstances. Are you sure, Lord? How can I know? What God does next is incredible. He answers Abram's question with a stunning display of his faithfulness when he makes a covenant with Abram. But it's not just any covenant, and it doesn't play out like a typical covenant of those days either. Chapter 15 details the covenant ceremony between God and Abram, but let me tell you the story now. Don't worry, you'll get to dig into it further in your personal study this week, so you'll have plenty of time to look into this. But I want to tell you, it's one of my very favorite stories, this detailing of this covenant with Abram, because God had Abram set up a covenant ceremony that would have been familiar to Abram, as it was a practice in the ancient Near East. In those days, contracts and promises made by two parties were taken super seriously and solidified through a ceremony that we might consider a little strange. See, they took it so seriously that two parties would make a covenant by taking, well, let me just show you. If I take these two salt and pepper shakers, by taking two animals and cutting them in half and putting them on either side of a path. They would split the carcasses, and you can imagine, I'm telling you a story about animals and blood, but you gotta know this is how seriously they took it. But these animals would be split in half and the blood would be running through this path. And the two parties would say, okay, we're going to lock arms and we're going to walk through these bloody carcasses and they would walk locked arms and chanting the whole way, basically making the promise as they walked through, because as they walked through, they were basically saying, let this mess, this bloody mess be done to either of us if one of us breaks this covenant. That's how seriously they took it. So seriously that they would set up a ceremony where animals' lives were given, and the two parties would walk through and acknowledge that there was no way that they would break the promise. So God gave Abram a list of animals to bring. He was to cut the animals in half and lay them down exactly the way the ceremony should go. The ceremony was about to begin, as we read in chapter 15. And as Abram was shooing off the vultures that were trying to come down and eat the carcasses, Abram was just waiting on God, like, I'm ready, God. I'm here for you to show up and we'll do this together. Like, we'll lock arms and we'll say, I will not break this promise that you've made to me. We'll do it together. But then the most amazing thing happened. God caused a deep sleep to fall on Abram. And in Genesis chapter 15, verse 17, we read, when the sun had gone down and it was dark, behold, a smoking firepot and a flaming torch passed between these pieces. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram. With so much at stake and such a significant promise, God chose to put Abram to sleep while he alone made the covenant, swearing by his own name. Why? To show that the covenant wasn't about what Abram could do. It never depended on Abram. His provision wasn't about Abram's faithfulness. Friends, the holy God of the universe, represented by smoke and flame, passed through the animal parts by himself as Abram slept. This ceremony that would have been for two parties to accomplish together was never meant for Abram to keep. God meant to keep this covenant himself, by himself. God purposely sealed the promise alone. Take a minute to let that sink in. Abram had no part in securing the promise. God promised it would happen based on his own character, based on his faithfulness. Basically, Abram can't do anything to make God walk out on his commitment. He understood and believed in the sureness of the covenant because of his confidence in the character of God. His assuredness is what fuels his belief that God will do what he says he will do, even when it seems impossible, or at the very least, extremely unlikely. You may be thinking, okay, what does all of this have to do with God being trustworthy and keeping his promises? It may not be obvious why this is connected on the surface, but I believe this covenant with Abram sets the stage for this entire study and this entire journey we're on together. Why? Because this is a study about God's faithfulness in our not yet wonderful circumstances. And this ceremony itself was pointing to a time that was yet to come, a time when God would fulfill his promise to redeem and rescue all who believe through the broken body and blood of Christ. So what happens next for Abram after this spectacular display of God's faithfulness? After some twists and turns in Abram's story, including an attempt to help the promise be fulfilled by sleeping with a concubine who bears a son named Ishmael. Again, I promise you'll investigate it more in your personal study. God repeats his promise to Abram once again in Genesis chapter 17. At this point, God even changes Abram's name from Abram, meaning exalted father, to Abraham, meaning father of a multitude. But this time, God specifically promises a son who will be born to Abraham's wife, Sarah, and makes it clear that this son will be how God fulfills his covenant. Read it with me here in Genesis chapter 17. We're going to be in verses 19 through 21. God said, "No, but Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his offspring after him. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I have blessed him and will make him fruitful and multiply him greatly. He shall father 12 princes, and I will make him into a great nation. But I will establish my covenant with Isaac, whom Sarah shall bear to you at this time next year. Well, Sarah laughs when she hears this promise that she'll have a child, but we're not told anything specific about Abraham's thoughts or feelings at this point. Remember what God's word said about Abraham's initial response, though. And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. Paired with what we read in Hebrews chapter 11, it seems clear from what the Bible tells us that Abraham was exercising faith from the beginning. Faith really is as simple as believing what God says is true. Over and over through various circumstances, while he waits, Abraham believes what God says is true. Abraham waited for many years, believing that God would be faithful to his promise, and he was. Isaac, the promised son from Genesis chapter 17, was born to Abraham and Sarah when Abraham was 100 years old, 25 years after Abram followed the Lord's direction to leave his homeland and journey to a place God would show him. God's faithfulness to the covenant was based on his ability to keep the promise, and nothing Abraham did changed God's plan to fulfill it. Friends, the reason we can trust the promises made under the covenant with Abraham and subsequent covenants as well today is that God swore by his own name, by himself, which cannot be undone. The promise cannot be broken. No matter what man ever does, God cannot break his word sworn by his almighty self. He is faithful. What about you? What are you waiting for right now? Does it feel like you've been waiting forever? Do you feel entirely unlikely for the things God has put in front of you? Are you trying to help God's promises be fulfilled? Here's a truth we can press into together. Even when it seems impossible, because God is a faithful promise keeper, you can believe what he says is true. Maybe you're waiting for healing, a reconciled relationship, for someone to extend forgiveness, for a child, or for someone you care about to come to faith, or maybe something else altogether. Do you need a reminder of his faithfulness? Here are just a few passages that proclaim it. Let them speak encouragement to your soul. Numbers chapter 23, verse 19 reminds us, God is not man that he should lie, or a son of man that he should change his mind. Has he said, and will he not do it? Or has he spoken, and will he not fulfill it? In Psalm 36, verse 5, we read, your steadfast love, O Lord, extends to the heavens, your faithfulness to the clouds. And in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 3, Paul reminds the church, but the Lord is faithful. He will establish you and guard you against the evil one. Friends, since he is faithful, will you believe that the things God has said are true? About who he is, about who you are, about how to live, and about what the future holds. Whether you get to experience the fulfillment of God's promises on this side of heaven or not, you can trust that he will do what he says he will do. So keep on believing him. Friends, I'm so glad you've chosen to invest time in this study. My prayer is that both the group discussion you'll have after this video and your own study for this week are rich. Don't get caught up in completing your personal study in exactly 5 days. It doesn't have to be perfect. You may need to tackle one written day over a couple of physical days, and that's more than okay. Do your best to finish the entire week, but even if you don't, come gather with your group again for the next week. It's so valuable. You won't be behind, and you're not too late to engage. May God reveal himself to you clearly as you dig into his word and see his faithfulness, friend. He really is more faithful than we know.